Let's read, and we'll read verses 22 through the end of the chapter in verse 34. So after the birth of Isaac. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore, swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my descendants, or with my posterity, but as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me and with the land where you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. When Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today. This is the first I'm hearing about it. In verse 27, so Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart, and Abimelech said to Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart? He said, these 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Therefore, that place was called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. It's not a long passage. It's kind of an interesting one because it doesn't feel like there's much of a narrative there to work with. So a brief but very interesting little stop today, finishing chapter 21. Since we've been following the story of Abraham, you'll realize, or you've probably come to know, that much of his life has been marked by always going. He's always moving, and as well as just tension. There's always some sort of tension in his life. And by the way, we only have 3 more messages in this series going through this point in Genesis. And after that, after the Advent season, we'll go through 2 Timothy together to start the new year. But anyway, Abraham, his life is always characterized by this movement and tension. We know that he's always on the move. All right, he's been on the move from the moment we kind of found him in chapter 12. He was called to leave his home, called to wander through unfamiliar lands, called to, as far as tension is concerned, called to wait, even though he sometimes did so impatiently, for promises that seemed like they would be impossibly delayed. All right, so there have been moments where he showed a lot of great faith, as we would expect, but also, as we've come to recognize and remember, there's been moments of compromise, fearful compromise. All right, and so now, by the time we reach the closing of Genesis 21 here, we find that something has changed. There's kind of a transition that takes place, right? As we discussed last Sunday, the child of promise, Isaac, has been born now. And so the covenant blessings are beginning to really take shape. And for the first time in his life, it seems, Abraham isn't hurrying off somewhere or reacting to the latest crisis. He's simply living. He's simply dwelling in the land and trying to deal honorably with his neighbors and even planting a tree. It's a quiet scene, especially given what we've grown accustomed to reading about his life. There's no angelic visitors. There's no fire from heaven. There's no dramatic pronouncements or anything like that. It's just a man at peace with those around him, at peace with himself, and calling upon the name of the everlasting God. It's the kind of peace that comes only when a person has stopped striving to make their life work and has learned instead to trust the faithfulness of God. And that's really, even though there's not much of a narrative, that's kind of the story of the passage. That's really the story of the passage here. Not about the treaty itself, not about bickering over a well, nothing like that. It's really just about what happens when faith kind of puts down roots. Faith settles into life. When a restless wanderer becomes a settled worshiper. And so with that in mind, I don't have 3 points today. Rather, I just kind of want to sift through this text together and see what we can glean. All right, so if we just walk through this for a moment, we've been told now that we've already met Abimelech. So we're told that Abimelech, the local ruler, and his commander come to Abraham with a kind of diplomatic proposal. All right, so these are people of another nation nearby, but close enough that this is a conversation worth having, right? They've been watching him, and from watching him, they've seen enough to come to the conclusion. The text says, God is with you in all that you do. It's apparent to them at this point. And when they say that, it's not just a matter of polite flattery, but it's really a genuine observation that would mean a lot for both of them. It would mean a lot for Abimelech to notice this, and for even though Abimelech would be pagan, he's not someone we would consider a believer. And so when he notices that, it's really important, not just in politeness, but as far as what it would mean for them both as neighbors, right? When Kaylee and I were looking for this new apartment, it was funny actually how it went about, because we had just gotten coffee or tea with Kaylin, and we saw the sign just on the road, apartments for sale, and there was a number or a little thing to scan, and we ended up calling. And did you apply when we got home, or was it the next day? Yeah, when we got home, and the next day I got a call immediately saying, when do you want to move in? And I was kind of surprised, and the lady on the phone was like, are you kidding? A pastor and an elementary school teacher? I was like, oh, okay. I guess that, you know what I mean? It's not just our profession, or my profession, but it's it actually means something to people who would want to be your neighbor. A lot of the times, I found this to be the case, a lot of the time, if non-believers or worldly people could choose their neighbors, they would probably choose Christians. I actually believe that. Because even if they don't believe what we believe, they know that it comes with a moral standard, a claim that I'm going to live a certain way and by a certain means. So it's not a matter of, again, polite flattery, or it doesn't make sense for a pagan to be, worried about flattering a believer. That wouldn't be on their radar. Rather, it just life-wise makes sense. If I know that this person lives their life by a book that says don't murder, don't steal, and the greatest commandment is to love thy neighbor, but then if I'm the neighbor, that sounds good to me. And so regardless of belief shared, that's just common sense. And similarly, in your life, you may at some point have non-believing friends realize that there's a special provident hand in your life. You live differently because you're a Christian. They may live alongside you and think, they still have joy in difficult circumstances. What's that about? They find peace amidst difficult loss. They love me even though I don't always show it back. They don't gossip or slander. They don't abuse one another. They tell me they pray for me, and it feels like they mean it. Not in the insulting way we sometimes do in the South. I'll pray for him. It feels like they actually mean it. You know what I mean? There's something different about my Christian neighbors. And that's what's happening here. You have Abimelech saying, God is with you in all that you do. It's clear, even to him as a non-believer. Abraham's life has shown the marks of divine favor to the point where even a pagan king can recognize it when he sees it. Right? And in their world and in their time, this recognition often led to a covenant between neighbors. Right? And so in verses 23 and 24, when the dialogue is, "Now therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my descendants, or with my posterity, but as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me and with the land where you have sojourned." And Abraham said, "I will swear." Right? It's when they say this, it's not like today when you hear people say, they'll say, "Swear to God," or they'll say, "I swear to God." You'll hear people say, that's not what's happening here. They'll say that today, often in a way to use God's name vainly, or to invoke a sense of seriousness or exaggerate their promise. That's not what's happening here when he says, "Swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me." That's not what's happening here. Because they aren't using God's name vainly, but they actually are including God relationally in this agreement. They mean it literally, right? And that's the difference between a covenant and a contract. Right? When I got married, that wasn't a contract. We didn't make a formal promise and then say, "Okay, swear to God." We didn't say anything like that. We're not in a contractual agreement, nor did we invoke God's name vainly. What we entered into was a covenant as people in relationship to God, swearing an oath by vows and a ceremony serving as a covenant sign. Right? So it's completely different. And God's, for us, right, God's involvement did not stop with our use of his name in the ceremony, so that people think we're taking it seriously. Rather, he's actually involved. He's actually involved in our marriage and in our daily lives and helping us keep that vow to him and each other in faithfulness. And similarly here, the language is not contractual, even though they're talking about land. Their neighbors, promising to treat each other well. But actually, it's to the point where it's not contractual, it's covenantal. And so God is in the day-to-day of their treatment of one another, literally. He didn't invoke God's name to show seriousness, and there's a formal covenantal agreement to live peaceably side by side, and it's not just for the sake of friendliness. There's real practical ramifications for both of them. Right? It's not two neighbors saying, "I'll let you borrow some sugar or some milk if you're out." It's not like that. For them, in the Near East, the ancient Near East, land and water were precious. They were vital. They meant everything. Right? A man's well, for instance, when they talk about the well, a man's well wasn't just a matter of convenience. It was a matter of his survival. So in verses 25 and 27, it says, when Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me. I did not hear of it until today. I mean, it's a pretty normal conversation. And so Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Right? So basically what's happening is, since this treaty about we're going to get along and it's going to be covenantal and we really mean it, and Abimelech wants this because clearly God has a hand in Abraham's life, they're about to make this treaty, this covenantal treaty. And so to ensure harmony between the two men, Abraham acknowledges this as an opportunity to not let things that have been brushed under the rug be brushed under the rug. Instead, he goes ahead and says, like, look, two of your, some of your men, they'd seized a well of my water. And Abimelech says, you're telling me for the first time. And Abraham is kind of saying, no, it's true. This was my well. And to show you I'm serious, that I wouldn't make this up. I'm going to give you some of my sheep and oxen, he says. And then the two men made a covenant. So they get everything out from under the rug. They don't hide a thing from each other. They say, if we're going to get along, we're going to communicate clearly, and we're really going to do this the right way. So he resolves this dispute over ownership of the well, because again, without his knowledge, some of Abimelech's servants had taken possession of it. Right, and then in order to show good faith in the process of ratifying this treaty, Abraham also gives 7 lambs to confirm that it really was him responsible for digging the well. As the text says in 28, Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what is the meaning of the 7 ewe lambs that you've set apart? He said, these 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Right? So I don't want to beat a dead horse. That's essentially what's taken place. He's just trying to show good faith, get everything out in the open before they make this agreement, to show that he's serious. And so when Abraham raises the issue of the seized well, he isn't being petty, and he shows that by his gift of the lambs. Rather, what he's doing is he's safeguarding the provision that God had given to him. God gave him that. And so Abimelech, for his part, goes to lengths to show that he's willing to make things right. And together they seal their understanding with that exchange of animals and that shared oath. And then you get to the end of the passage in verses 31 to 34. And it says, therefore, that place was called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. All right. So the place gets a symbolic name, as was often the case. Beersheba meant the well of the oath. All right. And so it thereby becomes a sort of cultural landmark for their agreement and a spirit of faithfulness and peace. And then, and I'll kind of focus in here, in a small but really symbolic gesture, Abraham plants a tamarisk tree. All right. And what's unique about the tamarisk tree, is that it takes years and years to mature, kind of like Cheez-Its. But it takes years and years to mature. And so this is unique because, just think about it. Like the statement that makes. When I was visiting my sister in Ireland, she was talking about getting a house and just how expensive it is to get a house, and really the fact that it's not like here where you have just neighborhoods that are built and people if they want to live in a place, if they want to settle in a place, they build a house there. So there's not really moving, and especially after you build a house. If you build a house, you're not doing that with the implication saying, one day I'm going to move. You build a house, you're there. It's a statement. It's a symbolic statement saying, I'm here to stay. I'm in it for the long haul. Right? So that's sort of the same thing with the tamarisk tree, symbolically. You don't plan one if you also plan on you don't plant one if you plan on moving the next week or the next year even. You plant one of those, it's because it takes years and years and years to mature and to grow, and you're going to be there years and years and years. So it really is a symbolic gesture. It's an act of permanence. It's a statement that says, I intend to stay here, and I trust God to sustain me all the while. It's really a beautiful circle kind of picture for Abraham. Just like for me, even though I'm online at a school in Lakeland, Florida, and at a place I used to live that I felt like the Holy Spirit did a lot of work in my life, and a place that's really sacred to me. And so it meant a lot for me, even though I'm online, I'll get to graduate there, walk there, and, symbolically at the very least, finish in a place that was very sacred to me in starting. And so things kind of come full circle for us sometimes spiritually. And that's really what's happening here in Abraham's life. Because like I said at the beginning, he's always been on the move. It means a lot for him to plant a tamarisk tree and say, I'm here for the long haul. Right? When we first started Abraham's journey, in chapter 12, verse 1, it begins, now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country. That's just how his story starts. And since then, he's had this nomadic, always on the move lifestyle. And now he's finally at a place where he can plant that tree and stay someplace to settle. And so in gratitude, he worships God, calling him the everlasting God. And so this story of his that started with him leaving home now comes to a close and begins to settle with him having a sense of belonging, with him settling, right? And so now at this point we ask, what are we to do with a passage like this? What do we do with it? It's an easy one to read and think, well, it's very nice for Abraham, and move on. That's the end of it, because it doesn't feel like there's much of a narrative, right? But just like even we've talked about with genealogies and stuff, it's not just included in the Bible for the sake of record keeping, just so you know that this treaty happened between two neighbors years and years ago. It's written to reveal what faith looks like when it's lived out in the ordinary patterns of life. What we see here is a man whose confidence in God has finally produced a sense of calm. He's not maneuvering. He's not manipulating as he once did in Egypt or Gerar. He's not trying to secure his future by his own schemes. He's not impatiently kind of moving in on God's will. He's trusting the everlasting God to hold him where he is and to provide what he needs. And that trust has made him a man of peace to the point where even it's a testimony to his neighbors. Peace with his neighbors, peace in his conscience, peace in his worship. And so really, when we think of what can we get from this, it's actually the most base level you can really get when it comes to the application of a passage of Scripture. Because when you think of what this sort of established faith looked like, or looks like when we settle into life and our settings and contexts of life and ministry for the long haul, faith doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't. More often than not, it looks like steadfast consistency. Paying your bills, keeping your word, treating people kindly, praying when no one's watching. And the world takes note of that. Abimelech did anyway. He said, God is with you in all that you do. And when I thought about you while reading this text, I thought, wouldn't it be something if that could be said of us? Not that we put on a good show, not that we're Christians who really know how to fake it well, but that God's presence is actually evident in the way that we live. And then there's the matter of the tamarisk tree. I really like this picture. Abraham plants something that will outlive him. He plants something that will outlive him. Truly. It's a declaration that he trusts the faithfulness of God to continue long after he's gone. And I want to stick around on this point for a moment because I really think it's applicable to our church and what we're trying to accomplish in terms of breathing life back into this place. This church has been in decline for years and years. And I've mentioned before, it's going to take years and years to turn it around. That's just the reality. The bigger the ship, the wider the turns. While I was in Northern Ireland, I visited where the Titanic was built and began its voyage. And I saw some of the things gathered from the wreckage, and I thought of our church. And I thought, I sure hope we didn't start turning the wheel too late. We won't know until we know. But God knows. And regardless, our mission is the same. Absolute faithfulness. The kind of mentality that plants a tamarisk tree. It strikes me that Abraham plants something he will never fully enjoy. Like I said, tamarisk trees take years and years to grow, decades even, before they begin to offer shade. He isn't doing it for himself. He's doing it for the generations that will come after him. It's an act of faith that says, I realize God's promises won't end with me. And so I speak this with loads of affection and gratitude for all your years of faithfulness here. But can I say gently that the goal of Christian faith is not simply to keep things alive until we're gone. Abraham could have said, well, I've had my fill of wandering and trying. I'll just enjoy these last few years in peace. He doesn't do that. He plants something knowing that it will outlast him. It reminds me of the hymn, Find Us Faithful. It says, we're pilgrims on the journey of the narrow road, and those who've gone before us line the way, cheering on the faithful, encouraging the weary, their lives a stirring testament to God's sustaining grace. Surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us run the race not only for the prize, but as those who've gone before us, let us leave to those behind us the heritage of faithfulness passed on through godly lives. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. May the fire of our devotion light their way, and may the footprints that we leave lead them to believe, and the lives we live inspire them to obey. And may all who come behind us find his face. I'll move on from this point, but let me just ask, what trees are we planting? What are we sowing in our prayers and our encouragement and our giving and our love that will bless those who come after us? Because when we plant in faith, we're saying what Abraham said that day at Beersheba: the everlasting God will still be here long after I am gone. And he will be. I could go tomorrow. I could. I mean, my dad passed away very young. Technically, my midlife crisis starts now. We don't know. So I have to ask questions like, what am I leaving behind, truly? I want to close this with an acknowledgement of this really beautiful name ascribed, Everlasting God. I really love that. Maybe you could try addressing him that way in your prayers this week, Everlasting God. I really think it's wonderful, especially as we have the lessons from Abraham's life in mind. You can almost see him now at this point in the story, gray-haired, weathered by years of wandering. And behind him lie all the missteps and mercies of long obedience and living in Ur, the dust of Egypt, the laughter of Isaac, the heartbreak of Hagar, the endless waiting that taught him what trust really means. And in front of him now, only God himself. Unchanging, undiminished, utterly sufficient. I think of my own life, even just as old as I am, and think of all the valleys and ups and downs, and think of how grateful I am that he never changes, but boy does he make sure to change me. Everlasting means more than merely forever. It's way more beautiful than that. More poetic, more heavenly. It carries a sense of beyond the horizon, the God who is before beginnings and after endings, whose years have no measure, whose power has no decay. Abraham's world, it was filled with fading things. Empires rose and fell, wells dried up, lifespans shortened with every generation. But the God who had called him out of the darkness into covenant light never faded. Not for a moment. As Psalm 90 says, Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting you are God. That truth steadied Abraham. And it must steady us. Because if we look honestly, we see the same frailty in ourselves that he saw in this world. Right? Our plans crumble, our bodies tire, our churches age, saints pass on, buildings need repair, ministries shift. And yet in the midst of all that change, all that passing away, all that fading, we can stand firm because he does not change, because he does not fade. He is everlasting. The everlasting God is steady, unshaken, completely sufficient. He does not grow weary. He does not falter, and his promises never fail. The God who kept Abraham faithful, who guided him through the dust of Egypt, and the long waiting for Isaac, is the same God who walks with us through every valley, through every joy, and through every challenge of our lives. The reality is, our days are short, our plans are uncertain, our strength is very limited, but the God who holds the universe in his hands is infinite. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Everlasting is not just a word. It's a palpable reality we can lean on and call upon in prayer. And so this is the task of our week and for our settled lives in Christ. Planting, trusting, worshiping, and resting and the everlasting God. Our benediction this morning